angels waging war in the unseen realm. Global events fulfilling biblical prophecy. Eternal life. What lies beyond mortality? From analyzing the paranormal from a biblical worldview to the discussion of cutting-edge science and technology. Conspiracy. Discovery. Special investigative reports. Unafraid to explore the challenging issues facing humanity. Welcome to another edition of Skywatch TV. Special Investigative Report.
Prophecies of the final pope and a coming cataclysmic battle between the forces of Christendom and Islam. Welcome to a special investigative report on Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert. This is On the Path of the Immortals. Our guest is the co-author of two best-selling books that attracted a lot of attention and some controversy. Exo Vaticana and Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope, is here. It is our honor to welcome to the Skywatch TV studios Tom Horn. Tom, welcome.
Hey, Derek. Great to be with you again.
The forthcoming book, On the Path of the Immortals, ties together a lot of threads, and we'll talk about some of these over the next couple of reports. Specifically, one that's in the news right now that seems to almost turn the calendar back to the 7th century, or at least to the 10th or 11th century, the days of the Crusades. There was recently a threat issued by a group that has attracted a lot of attention in the news over the last year or so, and that is the Islamic State, or ISIS. They issued a threat against Rome. You've done a lot of research, along with your writing partner, Chris Putnam, about the Vatican and the prophecies of the final pope. That led to the book Petrus Romanus. Is the Vatican taking this threat seriously? And if so, what are they doing to try to prepare for this?
You know, it's an interesting question, and actually I have to give you credit, Derek, because I had never actually taken the time to thoroughly understand kind of the apocalyptic vision, if you will, that the Islamic State has. What's motivating them? What is their philosophy? Where are they coming from, right? But once you do that, you realize that this is not a group of people that you're going to offer some kind of political concessions to, right?
That's right.
We'll buy something from you, or we'll play nice if you'll stop doing these terrible things you're doing.
Right.
Because once you understand really where they're coming from, even the beheadings, the atrocious things that they do make sense. They're doing it on purpose. They're trying to agitate the world to bring them down into a battle that they believe that Muhammad prophesied. This battle, the day is coming when you're going to fight this war in Dabiq. We'll talk about all this in a moment, against the armies of Rome. And you were the one that suggested I needed to figure out what that meant, right? When they're talking about Rome, what are they talking about? Are they talking about the Vatican? Are they talking about the Pope? Or are they talking about something else? And of course, I think they're talking about both. And in some instances, however, they're talking about this ancient prophecy that they believe is going to give birth to their version of the apocalypse, a great war against the armies of Rome. So the first thing you got to do, of course, is then identify who is Rome, right? And
Right, because right now the Vatican does not have its own armies as it would have during the Middle Ages when the popes were calling for volunteers for the Crusades to go and fight in the Holy Land to basically free it from the invading Muslim armies.
Right, and so, I tried to figure out, okay, who are they talking about? So I go and I'm reading different Muslim scholars that are talking about Rome. Somebody suggests this might be the army of Turkey, that maybe some war will break out between the Islamic State and Turkey.
Right, because the Turkey occupies the territory that was held by the Eastern Roman Empire. I think we in the West forget that when Rome fell in the 5th century, it was overrun by the Goths and the Vandals and these Germanic invaders. Constantinople, Byzantium, stood for another 1,000 years. So it wasn't until the 15th century that the Muslims, the Ottoman Turks, overran Constantinople. So the Eastern Roman Empire was still a viable political entity into the 15th century.
So it could be then that they're talking about Turkey, gets into some big skirmish with Islam. But I happen to think that it's something more than that. A couple of the other Muslim scholars that I was reading was saying this could represent symbolic language, and it could represent any infidel army. So if it was like George Bush, during the first Iraq War, and he calls for a coalition of nations, it was still mostly the United States, but there was a lot of nations that contributed a certain amount of, boots on the ground and armament or whatever for that battle. The thought is that this Roman army could be America, it could be a coalition of nations, but something very, very interesting unfolded actually just this week and last week that I think may tie this back into the prophecy of the popes and this Pope Francis, and the question of whether Francis is a believer. So what was it that he did? Pope Francis called for the revitalization of the Christian rules for just war, specifically for nations to come together under that banner, to come together under a Christian cause, right? So this is like a new kind of crusade,
right.
And the Pope's the one calling for it, and specifically to fight against the Islamic nation. So when he did that, this light went on. I thought, oh, wait a minute. Maybe this isn't just symbolic language. Maybe this is quite literally an army that is fighting under the Roman banner, the Roman version of the Christian rules for just war. So that put a whole brand new spin on it. Now, what do the Islamic State believe is going to happen? Why do they feel that it is their responsibility to initiate a war? And again, you pointed out to me that their own official magazine is named Dabiq, and it's named after this small town in Syria. And there's no international geopolitical reason for Dabiq.
It's not strategically important. There's no good military reason to hold that town, but the Islamic State spent a lot of time and blood in taking this town away from the government forces of Bashar Assad in Syria.
Right, and so you got like 3,000 people or something that live there. It's
right.
Mostly a farming community. But what I would say is for people to understand that this is kind of the Islamic version of Megiddo. So, in Christian eschatology, we have Har-Megiddo, we have Armageddon, based on also an area that's mostly a tourist trap or something. I mean,
right.
There's really not a lot of significance to it, but it is that place where we believe that there is going to be a final battle. It's that time at the end of the tribulation, and God intervenes on behalf of Israel against the armies of Antichrist, and the blood flows to a horse's bridle, and it just happens to take place there. Well, Dabiq, as I came to understand, this is kind of their idea, that it may seem insignificant, but it's where a pivotal battle against this Roman army is going to take place. Now, how do they draw? It kind of also reminded me of the Gog-Magog prophecies, where they put a hook in their jaw,
yeah.
and they draw them down. I guess it remains to be seen if their vision comes to pass, how they're going to draw this army down into Dabiq. But perhaps it's because they're making it their headquarters. Maybe they're going to put stuff there that we're going to want to go get or kill or destroy.
And this makes their actions easier to understand. I think we in the West have blinders on because we are so steeped in this belief of scientism, that we need to view the world through scientific glasses, that it's difficult to understand a group of people acting on their faith and what they believe to be true, religious faith. And these people, the Islamic State, and we should point out that their beliefs are not universally held in Islam. They are a sect of Sunni Islam, and as such, they are violently opposed to Shia Islam, which in that part of the world is mainly represented by the government of Iran. The majority of the people in Iraq are Shia. There are also the ruling government in Syria is a sect of Shia, Bashar Assad. But not all Sunnis believe what the Islamic State does. The Islamic State, as I understand it from the work of Dr. Timothy Furnish, who was really, he's been warning about this for 10 years, what he calls Mahdism. Those who are waiting for the arrival of the Mahdi, their version of the Messiah to return. They believe, as you say, this climactic battle will take place at this insignificant town in northern Syria, just north of the town of Aleppo. And their actions, they've been telling us exactly what they plan to do, and that's hence the beheadings, the horrific scene that was available on broadcast through the internet of that Jordanian fighter pilot who was burned alive in a cage. They are trying to provoke a war, and they believe that when that war takes place in Dabiq, something very significant will happen, and that is the return of their concept of Jesus, Isa, who will then help them then go forth to conquer the world. Again, if you take them at their word, their actions make a lot more sense. It's just that we in the West find it so hard to believe that people will actually act on these types of beliefs, that we can't, or at least our government leaders appear to be unable to grasp what they're trying to do.
That's true, because our worldview, a lot of what is still believed in the United States, even those who do believe in eschatology, churches for the most part don't preach prophecy or any of that anymore.
Right.
So a lot of this generation may not really kind of even understand where we're coming from. But even those of us who do believe in prophecy in a Christian worldview, we don't see it as our responsibility to make it happen. We simply believe it is going to happen. It's been pre-forecast. We can watch these signs as they develop and believe that the coming of Jesus Christ is imminent. So prophecy plays a role in our worldview, but we don't have one thing to do with initiating it, where with the Sunni in the Islamic nation, they believe that it's their responsibility to set in motion this war that then will give birth to the end times. And that's why they're trying to agitate the world. Public beheadings, burning people alive. They're trying to do and actually in that sense, the Pope has played right into their hands. And so is the United States in a lot of ways. You said, like our intelligence communities here. I'm publishing a book this year by Colonel Robert McGinnis. And you might know his name because he's a regular commentator on Fox News, Lou Dobbs, things like that. But he works at the Pentagon, and he is actually connected at the hip with the intelligence communities. And I think he's so concerned in some quarters of U.S. intelligence from the president on down, our lack of understanding about what these guys are doing and how they're going to get us to trip right into their plan, right? That he's writing a book and I'm going to publish it. But it also has a lot to do with Christian persecution, that ISIS is not just their apocalyptic worldview. Go behind these people and recognize there is a spirit of the age. And the spirit of the age is anti-Christian, and it is bloodthirsty. We're talking about entities here that live for this moment, right? That's Luciferian. But so behind their worldview, let's finish this one thought. We'll move on to the prophecy of the popes, because about the apocalyptic vision, right, of the Sunni, you mentioned I always say Mahdi. I'm not saying it right, am I? It's
I don't know if I'm saying it right either.
But anyway, the idea is that this battle is going to take place in Dabiq, and then they believe that the caliphate is going to become so popular in the world. People from all over the world, like these young girls that are jumping planes and trying to join the Islamic State, that's going to be quantified. I mean, people everywhere are going to want to be part when they see this army wipe out this giant coalition force. Now, what are they planning? Something biological? Is it your wife Sharon's Armageddon strain? Is it nuclear?
And in fact, there was a report last fall that a member or two of ISIS had traveled to West Africa during the Ebola outbreak, the height of the Ebola outbreak, and had returned to Mosul, which they had recently captured. And the World Health Organization took the threat seriously enough that they sent investigators to Iraq, to Mosul, to try to check it out, to see whether they had returned with Ebola.
Right. Well, and of course, some of the areas that they've marched through, Iran, Iraq, people don't know. Here in the U.S., we still kind of think of those countries as, basically riding around on sheep or something. But they've got some of the most advanced laboratories in genetics in the world. Yep. And among the Islamic nation, there are people that have high degrees in science and chemistry, and so we know we'd be crazy not to think that they're not already trying to cook up some weaponized version of some type of virus or something like that. But they also could have simply bought nukes off the black market, stuff that at one time, belonged maybe to Russia or something.
Or North Korea, perhaps.
Or North Korea. Yeah. So they're trrying to set some kind of trap. So anyway, the war happens some way, one way or another. They overcome the army of Rome, and then the caliphate begins sweeping across the world. If people don't know what a caliphate is, it's just it's a kind of Muslim governance that exists under a caliph, a guy who represents spiritual and political. Well, actually, he is their guide on all of those issues. And I forget what his name is.
Al-Baghdadi.
Yeah. So they've named a caliph.
Yes.
So they're following their own rules this way. So now the caliphate sweeps around the world. But then the Dajjal, their version of the Antichrist, shows up on the world. And he starts making war against the righteous army of the Islamic State, and he's successful. Right. And finally, he kills enough of them that they get all the way down where only 5,000 of them are left. They're cornered in Jerusalem, right? And that's when Jesus
returns. Right.
Jesus returns. He spears the Dajjal. And then he becomes the assistant or whatever, maybe the false prophet. In our eschatology, we might say he's the false prophet because he's the assistant to the Mahdi, who is their version of their Messiah. And we might call, guys like Joel Richardson would say this is the Islamic Antichrist.
Right.
And you mentioned a moment ago that there's different worldviews among the Sunni, the Shia, and whatever. And I learned that the Sunni, they don't believe the Mahdi's here yet. He's coming. The Shia believe he's already here, and that he's in a well with a magical door above it.
Occlusion, right.
Yeah, he's in inclusion, and that what they call it, culturation, or whatever the term is called, where
occultation or occlusion, I believe is the word. Yeah,
so
basically he's hidden.
Right. But then he's going to come up out of this well. And that, I think, also gives us some talking points that come out of the book of Revelation. I mean, did you ever stop to think that where the Islamic nation is right now is all along the Euphrates River? The Euphrates comes out of Turkey. It flows down through Syria, Iraq, all the way out to the Persian Gulf. And this is that very place in the Bible, the very stomping grounds of the Islamic nation is where in Revelation 9 the trumpets start sounding. And what does it say? It says
the four angels that are bound in the Euphrates.
Yeah. So they're waiting for something to come out of the ground. The Bible also says in that very area there are things that are going to come up out of the great river Euphrates, and they're going to wipe out 1/3 of humanity.
Right, right. Well, there are some apocalyptic prophecies that apply to, again, your book, Petrus Romanus, regarding the final pope. We are going to talk about that in just a moment. What are the connections between the apocalyptic vision of the Islamic State and the apocalyptic visions of the prophecy of the popes, but also the visions of the three children at Fatima in Portugal in 1913? We'll talk about that as our special report on The Path of the Immortals continues on Skywatch TV next.
Now we're on our way to the petroglyphs. There are some strange images that are there.
Yeah. I saw it with the naked eye. Yeah. Did you see it? The orb. I saw an orb with the naked eye. What is that?
In 2012, they shocked the world when they predicted Pope Benedict's resignation 1 year in advance. In 2013, they uncovered the mysteries of Mount Graham, the Lucifer device, and the Vatican's secret plan for the arrival of an alien savior. For the last 24 months, Tom Horn and Chris Putnam have been working behind the scenes on their most guarded project and greatest discovery yet. Mount Graham in Arizona is said to be a portal, and the Jesuits admit they are monitoring something there that is approaching the Earth. But as the Vatican knows and the authors just uncovered, this mountain is not the only gateway to another dimension. Now, in their new book, On the Path of the Immortals, Tom Horn and Chris Putnam set out with cameras and field investigators to document the most astonishing evidence of those behind the veil. Armed with inside intelligence from the native peoples, they unearth chilling evidence of what the Bible says about sacred locations and the giant beings that await their time from within.
They claimed that they could actually conjure light ships down, UFOs, aliens.
So what would have caused these ancient Pueblo Anastasi Indians to have departed this area with such great haste?
We don't know why they never finished completion of the Sun Temple.
Many of them escaped right through some of these mountains, some of these old Anasazi ruins.
Travel with internationally acclaimed investigative authors of Petrus Romanus and Exo Vaticana to learn the truth behind a secret so fantastic that it took 2 years and thousands of miles of research to document what has been kept hidden from the public by elitists and intellectuals who are planning mankind's assimilation under a coming savior.
Here's the six-toed giant our Indian guide told us about. And there's the fallen reptilian with the halo above his head that came through the portal.
One whom the prophet Daniel foresaw as an alien god. On the path of the Immortals.
Our special report on the path of the Immortals continues on Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert with Tom Horn, co-author of Petrus Romanus, Exo Vaticana, and the forthcoming book, On the Path of the Immortals, his co-author Chris Putnam. The prophecy of the popes, you talked about that at some length in other interviews, but also the prophecy that was given to the children, we're told, by Our Lady of Fatima, a vision that appeared on May 13th of 1913. Pope Francis appears to be a believer. Do you concur with that statement, or what kind of evidence do you see from the actions of this Pope as regards his belief and the extent of his belief in the vision of Our Lady of Fatima and the prophecy of the popes?
Yeah, I absolutely do believe that he is a believer in the prophecy of the popes, Our Lady of Fatima, probably some other Catholic prophecies as well. First of all, because in recent memory, we haven't had a pope who has been so willing to talk about apocalyptic themes. He believes in the Antichrist, he believes in demonic possession, he believes in exorcism. This is a guy that pretty much believes in supernaturalism, which would include end times events. And secondly, I'm very suspicious of some of the comments that he's made recently after being threatened, maybe privately by the mafia, but also being threatened by the Islamic...
Publicly by the Islamic State, right.
Publicly by the Islamic State. We know that those threats are being taken seriously at the Vatican. They've talked about the need to try to kind of increase security around Pope Francis. But the Pope himself has said several times in the last couple of weeks that he doesn't think he'll be the Pope very long, maybe not more than a couple of years. But then specifically he said that he is willing, if it is God's will, he is willing to be assassinated. He just hopes it doesn't hurt. That's what he said, right? Mm-hmm. So the fact that he's using that kind of key language leads me to believe that he may see the Islamic State as the facilitator of the prophecy of the popes of Fatima. And why would I say that? Because the threat is perceived as real. He's the pope that is sitting here as the last pope on the ancient prophecy of the popes list. And I think he and most other bishops and cardinals would admit that when the Fatima prophecy, the third secret of Fatima, was allegedly published in the year 2000, yeah, probably not, because it didn't match anything that they said about this assassination attempt against John Paul II. If people are watching this and they don't know what we're talking about, in 1917, you've got these three little shepherd kids, Lucy Santos and her two cousins, the Martos, and they claim that Mary has appeared to them as an apparition. Right. Now, interestingly, in the beginning, they didn't think it was Mary. In the beginning, they thought it was a demon. They thought it was a witch or something in a tree, right? And this apparition convinces them that it's Mary. And they start telling their tales. Well, in the town, local law enforcement, they're going to lock these kids up because they think they're lying, right? And so the kids talk to the apparition, and the apparition says, tell everybody to come to a field at a certain place there in Fatima, 1917, and I'll manifest myself, right? So on a certain day, and I think a conservative estimate was probably between 65 to 70,000 people actually show up.
And there are some pictures that people can Google and see on the internet.
Yeah, there are pictures. 1917, huge Kodak crowd. Already had black and white cameras and stuff that had been built at the time. And so they had media that was there. They had law enforcement. The bishop over the area was there, nuns. I mean, just massive crowd that gathered. And so they're out there, and at midday, in fact, people can Google Miracle of the Sun. and read this on Wikipedia or other places that tell this story of how they thought that the sun suddenly came unhinged because all of a sudden this giant disc-shaped object comes down over the top of their head, right? And starts shooting around doing all kinds of erratic things. All the faithful, they're falling to their knees. This is the Virgin Mary. Today, we'd call this a UFO.
Exactly.
You know, and we'd say you've been dealing with alien entities, and some of us conservative Christians would think this was completely demonic.
Right.
But so it lends credibility that whatever these young people have been dealing with seems to be some kind of legitimate unsolved mystery. And so there was 3 secrets that were revealed to these kids. And the bishop has them write them down. They published the first 2 in 1941. No, but one of them was a vision of hell. The other one, of course, was a vision of World War II. And if you read the vision, if you read the part that was published in 41, it's pretty amazing because it talks about things like Russia becoming a major global player in a world war. And at the time, Russia was just this little weak, insignificant nation. I mean, so it made some predictions. In fact, I guess it even names the Pope who would exist at that time. So, but it's the 3rd secret of Fatima. That's the one that perhaps in our next program we'll have to pick it up and talk there, because that's the one I think that could play into what ISIS is doing, the prophecy of the popes, why this pope is saying he would be willing to be assassinated. I think it covers a lot of key points.
Yeah, some very disturbing imagery in that 3rd prophecy. The bishop in white who is traveling up a hill and death and destruction all around him. And as to the question, does Pope Francis believe in it? Well, he had his pontificate consecrated to Our Lady of Fatima on May 13th of 2013, the 96th anniversary of the vision, and then he had the world consecrated to the Immaculate Heart of Mary in front of the statue from Our Lady of Fatima on October 13th of 2013. Interesting dates, 10, 13, 13, 5, 13, 13. We'll talk about that in our next special report here on Skywatch TV. This is all part of a lead up to the release of the book, the new book, On the Path of the Immortals, and we'd like to offer you a special package as we prepare for the release of this book. You can get all 3 books in the set, which basically this compiles essentially a 3-volume set.
It does, yeah.
The first book being Petrus Romanus, the final pope. The book Exo Vaticana, which talks about the fascination the Vatican apparently has with astronomical phenomenon and the money and effort that they've spent researching same. The forthcoming book, On the Path of the Immortals, Tom Horn and Chris Putnam return to Mount Graham and continue their investigation of what's happening up there on the mountain. And then we'd like to also add an excellent book that really takes a biblical look at what is going on out there among the stars, the possibility of extraterrestrial life and what it would mean for us as Christians from a biblical perspective, or perhaps the meme. Why are we being conditioned to accept the possibility of extraterrestrial life? The book What Lies Beyond by Jeffrey Martis, an excellent read and biblically sound. And in addition, a couple of DVDs, special reports, The Secret Vatican and Alien Antichrist Connection, a presentation that you gave at Chuck Missler's Strategic Perspectives Conference, and the DVD special investigative report On the Path of the Immortals. All of this over a $120 value, yours for $39.95. Again, Tom, we'll continue this discussion as our investigative report continues. Fascinating discussion. We've just scratched the surface. For Skywatch TV, I'm Derek Gilbert.